A reading from Luke. Jesus said, "There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." Then he told them a parable. "Look at the fig tree and all the trees, and soon as they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is already near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Be on guard so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, and that day catch you unexpectedly like a trap. For it will come upon all who live on the face of the earth. Be alert at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all these things that will take place and to stand before the Son of Man." I seldom have any particular difficulty in finding something in the gospel reading on any given Sunday that speaks to me and hopefully to you. However, when I first read today's gospel reading, as my shipmates and I were contending with the roaring of the sea and the crashing of the waves, some 100 miles off the coast of the Virginia coastline, the lesson from Luke seemed to have a special resonance. As many of you probably know, my friend Captain Eric, and your fellow parishioner Jerry Clume, and I spent most of the last 2 weeks sailing our Shannon 43, entangled, from her home port in Sterling Harbor to a secure slip in Vero Beach, Florida. The boat will wait there until after Christmas, when Karina and I will fly down to Florida and then sail to the Exumas in the Bahamas for a 3-month sabbatical. We'll then return, hopefully refreshed and renewed, in time for Holy Week and Easter. It's impossible to fully express my gratitude to you for making this opportunity possible. As you might imagine, the journey was filled with challenges, spectacular beauty, awe-inspiring sights, and new and interesting discoveries. But this sermon isn't a travelogue. It's a reflection on what Jesus calls signs, on ways of knowing and seeking guidance. As Jesus said, there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. The noted psychologist Dr. Alan Shore talks a lot about left and right brain thinking. We rely on the left hemisphere of the brain for practical purposes, for logical thinking, for meticulous planning, for careful attention to detail. We need that mode of thinking if we're to function well in the everyday, mundane, day-to-day world that surrounds us. When we engage in decision-making, choose a career, a place to live, a partner, determine what retirement might look like, we might engage the left side of the brain and do an economic analysis of the situation, put together spreadsheets or hire advisors or consultants. And that approach is useful and has its place. But there is another world, a world of spirit, that religion at its best calls us to. In today's gospel reading, Jesus is calling us to look for signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. And that is where the right side of the brain comes into play. Dr. Shore suggests that there is right brain dominance when engaged in activities like the use of metaphor, imagination, humor, music, poetry, art, morality, compassion, and love. This is the world of the spirit. I'd add to Dr. Shore's list nature, prayer, dreams, visions, pilgrimage, meditation, psychoanalysis, and synchronicity. All of these things point to the working of the unconscious mind. Tapping into the world of the unconscious is where I suggest to you God most clearly resides. If you desire to embark on a journey into the spiritual realm, you have to wake up and pay attention to the signs. We left Greenport very early in the morning with the light of a full moon, timing our sail through the Long Island Sound so that through our passage through Hell Gate, we could take advantage of a favorable tide. It was again dark when we made our way through the East River, through the heart of the illuminated Manhattan skyline, and then passing into New York Harbor, where millions of immigrants first entered our country. The Statue of Liberty greeted us. Lady Liberty, like many of us here, seemed more than a little worried about what the future might hold for our country. But at the same time, I sensed her assurance that we are going to be okay. I don't know that I began this journey looking specifically for spiritual guidance. It was my intention, to be sure, to stay awake and see what God might have in store for me, what might be revealed during our passage. After leaving New York Harbor and experiencing a few days of being battered by the wind and waves, our autopilot failed, requiring that each of us spend a cold 3-hour shift glued to the helm. We decided to take refuge for a couple of days motoring down the Intracoastal Waterway. As we left the ICW late in the afternoon, entering the Atlantic at Cape Fear, a school of dolphins swam alongside us, seeming to guide us along the narrow channel leading to the open sea, playfully showing us the way. By that time, Entangled only had a crew of 2, so our alternating 3-hour shifts at the helm meant that we slept less than 3 hours at a time for several days, and we grew weary. Yet, the solitary time at the helm, in the midst of each long night, was rewarded with a waning moon and a night sky filled with stars. Several evenings, my watch took place at sundown, and Venus, the evening star, served as my guide as she sank over the horizon. Several days my 3-hour watch coincided with daybreak, and one morning I was startled to see the rising moon appearing in the east, seemingly floating on the water, like a child's drawing of a tangerine orange boat with upturned bow and stern. This moon boat grinned at me as it rose into the sky and disappeared as the sun rose. I concluded that the smiling moon was telling me to lighten up and perhaps not take myself quite so seriously. Another morning at daybreak, an unusual wispy cloud formation appeared just above the horizon. I desperately wanted to get a picture, but since our autopilot was still broken, it was difficult to leave the helm, so I locked the wheel in place and quickly scrambled to a position in the cockpit where I could snap a photo. Then I could see that the boat-shaped waning moon I had watched rise the day before was now hanging out above the delicate cloud formation. Now bear with me here, because I want to take you through an example of imaginative inquiry. How to use a sign, a vision, or a dream in a way that leads you toward an unconscious understanding of the event, and maybe, just maybe, into the mind of God. As I stared at the elongated cloud, I found that it reminded me of the Wilmington Long Man. The Long Man of Wilmington is a figure on the steep slopes of Wendover Hill near Wilmington, East Sussex, in southern England, where I lived for a time as a young man. Originally etched into the limestone chalk, the Long Man has remained distinct for centuries, and for me has long symbolized permanence. I recognized in the image of the Long Man, and the Long Man in the cloud, my long-held desire to make a permanent mark, a lasting impression, to make a real difference in the world. And then, as the sun began to rise and the wind started to build, the fragile image in the eastern sky began to dissipate. And as I watched the wispy Long Man vaporize into nothing, I felt my attachment to permanence disappear as well. I was left with the realization that everything changes, all things fade away, and eventually become something else, something new. It was a message in these days of upheaval that I needed to hear. On his solitary watch, a few evenings earlier, Captain Eric had seen a colorful meteor fall from the sky, part of the Leonid meteor showers that appear each November. On my turn at the helm the next evening, I was hoping to spot one as well. By this time, our battle with the Gulf Stream convinced us to move closer to the shore, and we had finally arrived in Florida, somewhere off the coast of the Ponce de Leon Inlet. It was close to midnight, and I was fighting off sleepiness. Suddenly, I was awakened from my weariness by the sudden appearance on my starboard side, well above the horizon, of the largest object I had ever seen in the night sky. It was 3 times the size of a full moon, pulsating with reddish-orange flames. I howled with delight as this celestial object hung in the sky for more than a minute before it gradually turned to the east and continued on a path parallel to the ocean surface before it began to diminish in intensity, and a dimly lit tail trailing behind. The ball of flame finally disappeared. I was in ecstasy. I had never witnessed anything more spectacular in the night sky. I spent the next hour smiling, laughing out loud, trying to figure out what I had witnessed. And as I'm prone to do, I searched my mind for what kind of sign this might be, what message I was to glean from this remarkable vision. And as I wondered what God might be telling me, it slowly dawned on me that we were now sailing about 30 miles northeast of Cape Canaveral. And what I'd seen in the night sky was a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket setting a Starlink satellite into orbit. To my dismay, I realized it wasn't a message from God after all, but the handiwork of Elon Musk and his team of engineers. Not all visions are what they first seem to be. Still, I remained thankful and smiling throughout the night. When we finally made our way through the inlet at Fort Pierce and onto the narrow channel leading to Vero Beach, we were again escorted by a school of welcoming dolphins. I sent a picture of the friendly sea creatures to my learned friend, Aunt Priest, who responded with this quote from the Book of Symbols, Reflections on Archetypal Images. Quintessential saviors of the shipwrecked and drowning, dolphins are the nimble sea people who can be relied upon to buoy us up and carry us back to shore, protect us from marine marauders, keep us company in our lone passages through treacherous channels, and if we are lucky, escort our ships out of trouble before they founder in the first place. In today's gospel reading, Luke tells us to be on guard so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, and that day catch you unexpectedly like a trap. Be alert at all times. We've just left the season of Pentecost. 26 weeks of wearing green vestments. In the church, the season of Pentecost is called ordinary time. But there's really no such thing as ordinary time. Every day presents an opportunity to awaken to the life force that surrounds us. However, in the church, we recognize that we are human and we do fall asleep, and we occasionally need an alarm clock. Sometimes these alarms go off quite naturally when birth, death, marriage, separation, grave illness occurs. These are wake-up calls. These events tell us to pay attention. Something is going on that is more important than the routine of the day. But in reality, there is no ordinary time. All time is precious, and we dare not squander it. The spirit of Advent teaches us that we have something to wait for, and something important to do while we wait, to practice for what is to come, to perfect the craft of being human. We're just not waiting around for the Son of Man to appear. We are preparing the way. Amen.